Hi everyone. So just want to do a unscripted video. Well, it's kind of scripted. I have a few notes of some of the activities that I undertook today as a project manager, and just like to maybe go through some of these items with you, maybe mention them, and then possibly even give you some more detail about what exactly the issues were, what I actually had to do. So one of the first things, or one of the main things I had to do today was to update my schedule for one of my clients. Client wants me to include S-curves. S-curves are these, it's basically a graph of the, the planned progress of the project versus the actual progress of the project. So, this is something that they require. They want to see if you are on track. They want to see how much slippage there's been in the schedule, and so it's something that's very important for the client to see. It gives them a snapshot as to the health of the project, really. I also ordered some bearings. There's a project that I'm doing where for a fan system, there's these dampers, and these dampers that open and close to allow air to flow through the drift work. They require bearings, so I had to get those bearings. The sub-supplier who's manufacturing this damper, we're actually going to free issue the bearings to the sub-supplier, and they're going to use those bearings to assemble the damper. So I had to order those, and then there's a bit of labor that has to go into just modifying the bearings a little bit. So there's a sub-supplier who's doing that for us, and that sub-supplier will give it to the sub-supplier who's actually manufacturing the dampers. They will assemble it, and once it's assembled, we can actually ship it to the client's site. Also had to put together some engineering change requests for material changes that had to be made. The fans that we're making, they're actually designed in Germany. And what happens is, you see, our German partners really are sort of like a technical agent, or they or technology agent, if you can call it that. Basically, they own the designs of these fans, and then what we do this side is we use those designs and we create manufacturing drawings so that they're able to be manufactured locally. Very often, what some of the issues that come across is that there are materials, usually different types of metals that are available in Europe that are not available here in South Africa. And so what we need to do is we need to look at equivalent materials, and if we do find equivalent material, materials aren't always exactly the same. Equivalent materials aren't always exactly the same, and so there's some changes that have to be made. So sometimes the material, the composition, it might be let's say it might have a different yield strength. Because it has a different yield strength, some modification has to be made to that particular component that requires this material, and then to accommodate that different yield strength. So I had to put together some engineering change requests for these material changes. Unfortunately, these have come quite late in the project. It's of course the ideal for the engineers while they're doing the design work, to pick up these material changes and to understand or to pick up or to take into cognizance that some of these materials are not going to be available in South Africa, and then by that point, while they're busy designing already, to look for alternative materials, and then get the redesigns done as required. But nonetheless, I had to do those. I had to put together some change requests for these material changes. Those then have to be signed off by the German counterparts, who actually the owners of the design. I had to follow up with the design engineers who were doing drawings for a project. Just find out how they're doing when we're actually gonna get the drawings done. One of the most important components of any design is the foundation layout and the general arrangement. This allows the client to get a overall snapshot of the layout of the entire project, what goes where. It's also very important for the civil engineers to see how all the plinths need to be laid out, what needs to be done for the foundation. also included, in the foundation layout is what we call loadings, and the loadings are very important for the civil engineers who are actually designing those plinths and getting the concrete laid down and so on. Also responded to some engineers who are trying to make changes to some designs. Yeah, this is another thing. There's some changes that engineers want to do. And we're quite late in the project. I've already ordered various components, and so that these changes that are required. So there's this balance that you have to strike. The further a project goes on, or the more it goes from one phase to the next phase, the harder it is or more expensive it is to make changes. So while you're still in the design phase, you can make changes, and the changes are very, the overall impact of the changes is not very much financially. It might have an impact in terms of the schedule. So if you take long to do all these changes, it might end up delaying manufacturing, and if it delays manufacturing, it will delay the final delivery date of the project. But if you make those changes during the design phase, to make those changes is very cheap. It's just a few hours of the engineer's time. That's it. But let's say you've already manufactured, and now suddenly you realize you have to make a change, and now it becomes a problem because maybe the material that you've ordered is the wrong material. Let's take a shaft, for example. If a shaft had to be forged, now you want something that is of either a different material, or maybe it's a bigger diameter, and now you got to start that process all over again. So that becomes very expensive. But at the same time, there comes this point where there's this desire sometimes to make these incremental changes that don't have a major impact, at the end. There's this desire maybe from the engineer side to get things 100%, like for it to be completely perfect. Let's say like 99.9% perfect, whereas like 90% would be good enough. So there's this balance that it's important to strike, because on the one hand, you might suffer the consequences of a design that is completely bad, and it's going to fail and it's going to hurt somebody. But on the other hand, you're faced with something that's that can be reasonably good, but if you continue to make these changes, to make these incremental improvements, it might delay the project, and that's also bad because the delivery date, is pushed out, and now you suffer penalties for late delivery. And then also whatever that component might be required for, that has knock-on effects and so on. So obviously, a person's life is much more important. It's very important to make sure that something is safe, but at the same time, that has to be. I wouldn't say weighed against. Obviously, like I'm saying, the life is much more important. So you got to make sure that's not there. But there comes a point where things are reasonably okay. You have high enough confidence that things aren't going to fail, and to make more changes is just going to cost you more time and more money, and it's really unnecessary. But anyway, so I had to make this response. I had to tell them, look, this design seems reasonable enough. I don't think it's going to fail. We've seen previous calculations or previous reports from this particular design that things should be fine. So it's not necessary to make these changes. If we make these changes, it's just going to end up in a delayed project, which can be bad, or which will actually be very bad. So I had to make that response, make that call to say that we can't make any further changes. And then also I amended several purchase orders for sub-suppliers. So interesting situation. We had a project we have this project where some items are being made from particular material. I had given that component of the project to a certain sub-supplier, and then the sub-supplier came back and said they're unable to find this particular material and they want to import it, and that's just going to take too much time. Shipping is going to take too many weeks, and it will just push us way late for the delivery. And then if it was going to be air freight, then it was just going to be too expensive. And then there was another sub-supplier who said, I actually have found this material locally, and so what I did was then I took the work from this sub-supplier, gave it to the sub-supplier who was able to provide the material. I did have some other plans or some other solutions to this problem that I would have tried, but thankfully this sub-supplier was able to find that material. And so I just had to mend those purchase orders. So that was kind of my day in a nutshell. Um, and yeah, so uh, till tomorrow then. Okay, once again, just a recap of what I did for the day. I'm actually doing this the next morning. I finished um, busy with some things late last night, so I didn't get a chance to make this video. But nonetheless, this is a recap of my day yesterday. Okay, so I did some quotations, got some quotations for bearings. So I do need to get bearings for these shafts, um, shafts that are being used for fans. You know, you have the impeller, and then the impeller sits on a shaft, and the shaft sits on bearings. Of course, you know, there's a fan casing. There's a fan casing that surrounds the impeller and part of the shaft, and then on the outside of the shaft there are bearings. Sometimes the bearings actually sit on the one side. We call that an overhung arrangement. So you have two bearings on this side, and then you have the shaft protruding through into the casing as the impeller. But anyway, so I had to get quotations for bearings, and the quotations came back and actually showed us that the delivery time for the bearings was going to be quite a bit beyond the delivery date for the fans. So this was just actually one set of bearing housings. So you know, there's quite a few different bearings for this project, but one set in particular, it was going to be about 12 days late for the delivery date, 12 days after the required delivery date for the fan. So that put me in a bit of a pickle, because well, it was kind of my fault, because I was supposed to have ordered these bearings weeks ago, but because there was just so much things to do for this project, so many different moving parts, so many issues, material issues, like I mentioned in a previous video, I just neglected to get those bearings ordered. But fortunately, I managed to phone another supplier, and he mentioned to me that they were actually getting a shipment in at the end of March, so it's possible for us to get those bearings at the end of March. And actually, what ended up happening is, you know, after I got the quotation from him, he actually told me that they had some stock of these bearing housings, so we're actually able to get it within the next couple of days. So that was a bit of a save, but I was almost in deep trouble. Very important to stick to the schedule and make sure that you order things when they are required. You know, when the schedule was done, it was indicated that the lead time would be 8 weeks, and this is exactly what's happening. The lead time would be 8 weeks. But now, you know, I thought that, hey, it shouldn't be too bad. The schedule is usually very conservative. In this case, it wasn't. It was exactly right. But fortunately, we were able to get those bearings ordered from another supplier who was able to get them sooner. I also had to give drawings to one of our sub-suppliers for shafts. And yeah, so, you know, the drawings have to be issued for manufacture. They have to be approved, signed off by engineers. And also what's important is that whenever you give drawings to sub-suppliers, that they go with the document transmittal, so that you know exactly which revision of the drawings you gave to the sub-supplier who's manufacturing the item. And the sub-supplier also can't come back to you and say, hey, I didn't get these drawings, or say that, hey, I did this a certain way because the drawing said this, but then you know that the revision of the drawings that you gave him said said one thing and he's done another, and you can say, hey, this is what you should have done and you didn't do it. Okay, that's why document transmittal is very important. I also worked on the schedule for the client. It's important to make sure the schedule is good from the start. I was working on the schedule yesterday, and I just found so many different items that weren't recorded properly, and you know, this could potentially have put me in a position where I was going to be very late. But there was just so many mistakes in this thing that ended up working okay. But it's very important to make sure that the schedule that you're using to operate the project or to run the project is up to standard from the beginning. This schedule was given to me from the sales engineers or the application engineers. What they do is when they sell the job, or sell, you know, when they're tendering for the project, they put together a schedule, and this is what the client sees. and that schedule is handed to the execution department or the project department, the department that I work for. But sometimes that schedule is not 100% correct, and so I think what I should have done is when I received the handover, I should have checked to see that the schedule was perfect, from the get go. Unfortunately, I didn't do that, and I'm seeing that now. Things like certain items, certain lines in the schedule were not properly given the right predecessors, and so certain tasks are not flowing as they should do. So that was the schedule. Important to make sure that the schedule is right from the get go. And then also status reports for my supervisor. I had to give status reports to my supervisor just to indicate what are some of the things that I've completed, what are some of the tasks that I'm gonna follow, and then also what are some of the issues that I've been facing historically and currently. And that also gives like a good snapshot to see where help is needed, and where in the future, when another project comes along, things need to be changed. And then lastly, I processed orders for some fans, so for fan casings and for the impellers. And what actually ended up happening is, because there's some special material required for the fan casings, the quotations that I received, the cheapest of them was 300,000 rand above what we had budgeted for. So when the sales engineers or when the application engineers are tendering for a project, they give a budget value and then they give a sell value. So what we expect to pay for the components, and then also what we actually bill the client for that particular component. And so what we expect to pay for it was actually 300,000 rand over what the quotation said was that we're actually going to now pay 300,000 rand over what was initially budgeted for, what we expected to pay for this. But that was for the fan casings. But fortunately, with the impellers, the price was actually 500,000 rand cheaper than what we had expected to pay for them. So there was a bit of a saving there. But this is actually what happens very often. You have a saving here and overspend there, and these things can balance each other out. So that's what my day was like. Those are the things that I did. Hi, so today is Friday, and usually at work we finish a little bit early on a Friday. We finish at 2 p.m. So it's just some of the activities for today. I was actually busy this morning. From the morning, I was busy with that MS project tool, and I was busy working on S curves. So what I was doing was trying to make this S curve, looking at the 20th of each month from the start of the project up until the completion of the project. So the project is not yet complete. It's only due for completion sometime in 2020. And so what the client requested is that for every single month, I indicate I indicate the progress up to that specific status date, and then also that's for every single month. And then for the months that are still to come, I must indicate the forecasted progress for that. So what I found actually in MS Project is that one of the columns, percentage work or percentage complete, didn't seem to be working so well. I don't know what the issue was. I'm not sure if it was something that I was doing wrong, or if it was something that I don't know. Maybe there's something wrong with the formula for MS Project. But anyway, I decided to write my own formula for that, and after a little bit of playing around, I managed to write my own formula for percentage or actual percentage work complete. So now every single month, the 20th of each month, I can look at the actual work complete versus the planned work complete, and then I can get a percentage of that. And so so there we go. So that means that I can put that in my S curve. The S curve will have two lines, the one line showing the planned work complete, and the other line showing the actual work complete for every single month on the 20th of every single month. Then also I needed to give some documents to a manufacturer, somebody who's fabricating fan casings and impellers for us. This was actually a very interesting thing. This guy came over to me and he asked for these drawings. And while I was busy preparing a document transmittal for the new drawings that I was going to give him, it actually occurred to me that he had actually taken the drawings previously. He had actually taken some of the drawings previously. So, I was looking through the drawings that I had that were issued for manufacture, and I noticed that some of these drawings are not there. And then I realized, man, this guy, I think I actually had given him those documents previously. So, I said to him, hey, I'm sure I gave you these documents. And he said, no, we still need these documents. And lucky enough, the previous time I gave him the documents, I actually did a document transmittal. Went to my file, pulled out the document transmittal, and sure enough, there was a document transmittal indicating that I had given him the drawings. Now, this is not a big issue. It was just a case of knowing what the truth was, and the truth is that I had given him the documents. I told him that, look, I can print more documents for you. There's no problem with that. The only issue was that the documents that I had given him, the drawings that I had given him, I had A2. I had printed them A2, and now I didn't have another set of A2 drawings, so I had to print them in A3. And I said to him, look, I don't have an issue with you with printing new drawings for you, but they're going to be in A3. So really, the document transmittal just helped us to realize that, or helped us to see the fact that I had given him the documents, given him the drawings, and that now that I was giving him A3, it was going to be acceptable. So document transmittal, very important. Actually, something else that happened today. When we do orders for fabrication or for our sub-suppliers, we actually send, we actually have this entire routing process, and now I sign off the purchase, and then my supervisor signs off, and then after that it goes to one of our financial managers. Our financial manager currently is not sitting in the same office as us, and this document now had to go to this financial manager, and our project coordinator was just really scared that those documents were going to get missing. And so I decided, okay, fine, let me do a document transmittal for this. And we had some of our engineers that came over, that are doing drawings for us. They came over to discuss some issues. I'm going to get into that in one of my later points. But I actually asked him to take the documents, take the request for purchase order to be signed off by our financial manager, gave it to him, and he took it to the financial manager, and he sent me a document transmittal. He sent me the signed document transmittal. So now at least I know that I can ask the financial manager. I said, hey, listen, I gave you these documents, and here's my proof. Document transmittal is very, very important. I requested some quotations for bearings. We noticed that there was a big discrepancy between two of the quotations that we received. I mean, one set of housings was 20,000 Rand, that we received that quotation from one supplier, and then the same housing from a different supplier was 1,000 Rand, and that was quite concerned. We didn't know what the issue was there. Obviously, it was a different make of bearings or different make of bearing housing, but still, it's a huge difference. So we requested quotations. I sent out a request for quotation to other bearing suppliers, and hopefully we'll see how that comes out. Yeah, and like I said, I had a meeting with our engineers to talk about the progress that they're making. There were some changes because of changes in materials. There were some changes that needed to be made on impellers and also on fan casings. And so I just had a chat with them about that, just giving me an update on the progress. And then also there were some late changes that were requested by the actual original designers of these fans. And they wanted to show me what the effect would be if they had to make these changes. What the knock-on effect would be. So the original designers of these impellers, they request that we put some reinforcing plates in certain areas. And so now our engineers came to me and said to me, look, if we just make the change to this impeller, and also they had requested the change in the shaft. They said if that is changed, then fan casings are going to change, the seals are going to change, we might have to change the bearings, and so just so late in the project to have to make these changes. But yeah, we had a bit of a discussion about that. And then lastly, instrument list. we had an instrument list compiled for a project that we're doing, and I had to upload those onto the client's portal. So now the client has a record of all the instruments that we're going to be buying, and we're going to be sending to them or supplying to them, and also a list of the items that they need to procure themselves for operation on the plant. So that was my Friday. Yeah.